Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome.
Welcome! Welcome one and all. And welcome to a very special milestone on our trip through Middle-earth. We have reached the midpoint of the movie. 6 hours down, 6 hours to go. So I thought we'd do something a little out of the ordinary for this episode. Anyone who has followed this series over the past few weeks has probably noticed a few things. For a number of reasons, or none at all, it has evolved, both in purpose and in methodology, as I struggle to find ways to present information without running afoul of the dreaded Content ID system, aka Copyright Bot. But even more so, as I rewatch and reread the films and books, I find it increasingly obvious that the further we travel through Tolkien's world, the further Peter Jackson strays from it. I pointed this out a number of times, but with the second half of The Two Towers, this tendency seems to be getting out of hand. With this in mind, I thought it would be interesting to examine this tendency in more detail. So, putting the main series temporarily aside, I decided to produce a video containing only the scenes that are actually filmed as described in the book. Obviously, nothing is 100% black or white. There are scenes in the book that are people just sitting around and talking, having no visual appeal, or merely descriptions of the scenery. So if a scene is close enough, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. But there are some that look close but are actually on a different planet. Don't assume anything. I will be flagging the scenes I do include by adding captions to the clips as appropriate. Something like my big red / not in book circle, slightly modified, somewhat modified, or heavily modified, or none at all if it's pretty close, or actually accurate. In the case of a tie, the book wins. So let's go. As previously established in episode 9 and chapter 6, Éowyn led the non-combatants, women, children, elderly, and infirm, to Dunharrow, another of Rohan's strongholds, about 30 miles south. Theoden, with Éomer, who was not banished, Gandalf, who has not left the company yet, and Aragorn by his side, led the riders to Helm's Deep, about 50 miles north. Therefore, the first 18.5 minutes of the film is mainly nonsense. One point that passes is that Gandalf leaves at what would be about 4 minutes in. Gandalf did not call his shot at dawn on the 5th day in the east. He merely said, "Await me at Helm's Gate." And as far as wargs go, there's only one mention of them.
The riders were still in the low valley before the mouth of the Coombe, when cries and horn blasts were heard from their scouts that went in front. Out of the darkness, arrows whistled. Swiftly a scout rode back and reported that wolf riders were abroad in the valley, and that a host of orcs and wild men were hurrying southward from the fords of Isen and seemed to be making for Helm's Deep.
And wargs are overly large, overly aggressive, and overly evil wolves, not some sort of weird bear-hyena hybrid.
There is always smoke rising from Isengard, the days.
Isengard?
There was a time when Saruman would walk in my woods. But now he has a mind of metal.
Everything in Fanghorn happened 3 chapters ago, not chopped up and scattered around. So this heavily modified scene caption indicates relocated. Now, Treebeard's comments about Saruman are accurate, just an hour too late. Since there was no battle with wargs, Aragorn could not have fallen off the cliff and floated downstream. And since Arwen does not appear in the book at all, her vision could not have prayed to the Valar to save Aragorn. And since Aragorn never set him free, the non-existent Brago the Wonder Horse could not have rescued him. Aragorn was with Theoden and the non-banished Éomer the whole time. Needless to say, this episode with Arwen and Elrond, along with all the others, is pure Jacksonian fiction. Likewise, the telepathic communication between Galadriel and Elrond. But the video of Frodo and Sam being led under the waterfall is accurate, and makes a nice segue to the next heavily modified scene.
Take the ring for his own, and the world will fall.
The sequence with Faramir is a problem. At various times, parts of it fall into all categories, and they are so thoroughly mixed, it's really not worth the effort to separate them. The main takeaway is that he was much more understanding in the book.
We set out from Rivendell with 7 companions. 2 were my kin. A dwarf there was also, and an elf, and 2 men. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and Boromir of Gondor.
You're a friend of Boromir?
Yes.
He was my brother.
The entire Boromir, Denethor, Osgiliath flashback is another of Jackson's fevered dreams.
Rivendell has called a meeting. He will not say why, but I have guessed its purpose. It is rumored the weapon of the enemy has been found.
Smeagol's capture is pretty close, but he was not beaten so much back in the cave.
Capture fish so juicy.
Come on. Don't hurt him! Smeagol, don't struggle! Smeagol, listen to me!
As I've mentioned before, a number of characters have been tested by the ring. So far, only Boromir has failed. Now Faramir has the ring practically in his grasp. But
fear no more. I would not take this thing, if it lay by the highway. Not were Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her, so, using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory. No, I do not wish for such triumphs, Frodo, son of Drogo.
And a bit later, when Sam accidentally says a few things he really shouldn't have, Faramir confirms.
Alas for Boromir, it was too sore a trial. Not if I found it on the highway would I take it, I said. Even if I were such a man as to desire this thing, and even though I knew not clearly what this thing was when I spoke, still I should take those words as a vow, and be held by them.
I'll take that as a pass. But Faramir does release Frodo, Sam, and reluctantly Gollum. Whether it happened or not, and it didn't, that's one hell of an entrance. More Fanghorn, which should have been back in episode 8.
For a very long time.
The every man and strong lad line was actually said in the previous chapter, back when the Rohirrim were preparing to leave Edoras. Preparations for the attack aren't really mentioned that much, and it's the non-banished Éomer, not Theoden, doing it. And Gimli's comments are about the stonework, not a critique of tactics. No elvish archers, no matter how moving the moment is. Now, similar to the Faramir subplot, many scenes from the book do show up, but as frequently happens, they're inserted in different sequences.
So it begins.
We have...
And more Fanghorn, which should have been back in episode 8. Again. Wilhelm scream! Okay, so most of this would actually qualify as either slightly modified or somewhat modified, but there's so much of it, and Warner Brothers simply won't let me show it to you. And a few more minutes of slightly or somewhat modified scenes. This is not the Olympic torch. There are actually a number of references to bombs, or whatever you want to call them. At one time they were called Devilry of Saruman, and another time a Devilry from Orthanc, a blasting fire. And they've gone off, I think, 3 times that I can find here. Definitely not in the book. Come on now. Really? Sorry, Halder. You really do not deserve to be a victim of Peter Jackson's ego. Let's just agree that from here on out, on the Battle of the Hornburg, unless there's something really specific, special, we will just treat everything as a combination of slightly and somewhat modified, because that's basically what it is. Instead of trying to keep doing these little 5 and 6 second clips, we will just watch our own copies of it and understand that it's kind of close, but not really. Okay? Yes. Except that it was Aragorn and Éomer that went out the postern door, and after a brief skirmish, went back in through that same door. And nobody got tossed.
The Ents cannot hold back this storm. We must weather such things as we have witnessed.
Stop! This is the point I mentioned back at 1945 of Episode 7, and now needs to be dealt with. Now listen.
Then with a crash came a great ringing shout. The trees quivered and bent as if a gust had struck them. There was another pause, and then a marching music began like solemn drums. And above the rolling beats and booms, there welled voices, singing high and strong.
We come with roll of drums,
Peter Jackson lied to us. This is inexcusable. This is not an adaptation. This is a bald-faced lie. There is no excuse of any kind for turning such an important event in a story 180 degrees.
The Ents were swinging along with
the Ents are going to war on their own volition, not waiting to be tricked by Pippin, despite the efforts of Peter Jackson.
Keeping step with their feet and beating time with their hands upon their flanks. As they drew near, the flash and flicker of their eyes could be seen.
Here we come, the moon. Here we come at last.
Cold Treebeard when he caught sight of Bregalad at the hobbit.
Come, join the mood. We are off to Isengard.
The Ents cried in many voices.
To Isengard, though Isengard be ringed and barred with doors of stone. Though Isengard be strong, hard as cold as stone, as bare as bone. We go to war, to hew the stone and break the door. For bone and bow are burning now, the furnace roars, we go to war. The land of gloom with tramp of doom, with roll of drum, we come with power. To Isengard with doom we come, with doom we come, with doom we come.
So they sang as they marched southwards.
Since we have now determined this scene is not in book, and therefore neither is Pippin's cunning plan, we can move on to other events. Except Osgiliath, of course.
Many of these trees were my friends. Creatures I had known from not
Treebeard used this phrase way back when he was first explaining Saruman to Merry and Pippin.
Saruman. A wizard should know better.
Much of this next sequence is merely flagged for being out of sequence. Many of the lines were spoken 3 chapters back in the book. In universe, as fantasy fans say, this all took place a day or two ago.
What can men do against such reckless hate?
Ride out and meet them. For death and glory. For Rohan.
A bit backward. Theoden decided to ride out and asked Aragorn to join him.
The horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep. One last time.
Let this be the hour when we draw swords together.
And backwards again, Aragorn said this to Éomer at the beginning of the battle. Now, remember when I said the explosions went off 3 times? Well, the third one happens now. And as the debris settles, yes, the charge out of the keep and across the causeway is real.
There, suddenly upon a ridge, appeared a rider, clad in white, shining in the sun. Behind them, hastening down the long slopes, were 1,000 men on foot. Their swords were in their hands.
So, not Éomer with 2,000 horsemen. Rather, this fellow Erkenbrand with 1,000 foot soldiers. But the effect on the orcs is much the same. Nope, no Osgiliath. I love watching the Ents do their thing. Too bad they didn't do it in the book. Well, not exactly. It's another heavily modified scene due to relocation. We're only informed of it after the fact, and not until the next chapter. But I guess this is tolerable. At least it's better than just listening to Merry and Pippin tell it.
Oh, a hit. A fine hit. Ah!
Did I mention no Osgiliath?
It's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here.
You're right, Sam. You shouldn't be here. This is not in the book.
Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back.
Now,
only they
Sam's speech here is a big deal to a lot of people. But it's not Tolkien.
There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
I think at last.
But Faramir sees the light, but he saw it in the book ages ago. And we didn't have to sit through all this crap about Osgiliath that only exists in Jackson's imagination. Another told about it after the fact in the next chapter. And if Jackson hadn't cut the last 5 chapters of the book, this would be heavy foreshadowing.
Let him leave. The finest pine right in the South Farthing.
According to the book, quote, wailing they passed under the waiting shadow of the trees, and from that shadow none ever came again. Unquote. The hike through the woods is real, but the conversation is not.
I wonder if we'll ever be put into songs or tales. What?
Well, that should do it. If memory serves correct, The Return of the King is just as bad about rewriting the source material. So I may be inclined to do this again. But I will return to the normal format of the main series and for a full commentary, or two, of these chapters. Be sure to keep checking back.